So, good morning and welcome. My name is Claire McElroy. I work with the Whatcom County Library System, and I want to welcome you to the final event in this year's Whatcom Reads celebration. This last event is a conversation between our featured author, Erica Bauermeister, and librarian Katie Bray. Before we get started, we'd like to acknowledge that although this event is taking place online, Whatcom County Library System buildings are on the ancestral homeland of the Nooksack, Lummi, and other Coast Salish peoples. They are the original inhabitants of this place, and they are fishers, hunters, gatherers, and harvesters of nature's abundance, and have been so since time immemorial. We are neighbors and friends, and we are grateful for our numerous opportunities to learn, live, and grow together, building lasting relationships so that all may prosper. So a few words about Whatcom Reads, our community-wide reading program. Since the beginning, Whatcom Reads has been a team effort with representatives from Bellingham Public Library, Bellingham Technical College, Northwest Indian College, pardon me, Western Washington University, Whatcom Community College, Whatcom County Library System, and of course our community partner, Village Books. Major funding from Whatcom Reads comes from Whatcom County Library System, the Friends of the Bellingham Public Library, and the Whatcom County Library Foundation, with additional support from Western Libraries, Bellingham Technical College Foundation, and, of course, a percentage of the sales of no two persons from Village Books. We get a donation from Village Books for sales of the book. So thank you, Village Books, for that as well. We want to give a special thanks to Allied Arts of Whatcom County for organizing the Whatcom Reads Art Challenge, and to the Hotel Leo for providing accommodations for our author for her visit to Bellingham. This has been a busy and invigorating Whatcom Reads season with programs about how books impact us in a variety of ways. No two persons encapsulates exactly what a community read is. An entire county all reading the same book and discussing our unique experience with that reading. We had programs on bibliotherapy, what it's like to be an audiobook narrator, the life cycle of a book, and even hands-on workshops creating meander books and painting buoys to celebrate our waters here in Whatcom County. Erica herself has spoken multiple times, participating in a book discussion on Lummi Island, a writing workshop at Village Books, our Sip and Savor event at Bellwood Farms, where we paired books and beverages, and a full house event at the Mount Baker Theater. Now she's here for one last event. We are so grateful, Erica, for all that you have done with us over the last 4 days. If you have a question for Erica during the course of this event, please pop them in the Q&A function that is at the bottom of your screen. And we will get to as many as we can in the time that we have. And it's very helpful to our moderator, Katie, if you use the Q&A function rather than putting the questions in the chat. If you forget and put it in the chat, don't sweat it. We'll be watching that too, but it is easier if they are in the Q&A function. So Erica Bauermeister is the author of the best-selling novels The Scent Keeper, The School of Essential Ingredients, Joy for Beginners, and The Lost Art of Mixing. Her memoir, House Lessons, Renovating a Life, was a finalist for the Washington State Book Award. She is co-author of 500 Great Books by Women, a reader's guide, and Let's Hear It for the Girls, 375 Great Books for Readers, ages 2 through 14. She has a PhD in literature from the University of Washington and has taught there and at Antioch University. And she's a founding member of the Seattle Seven Writers and currently lives in Port Townsend, Washington. Erica is joined today by Katie Bray, beloved librarian of Bellingham Public Library. It's true, Katie. And so please join me in welcoming Erica Bauermeister and Katie Bray.
Thank you so much. That is a really big and very effusive introduction, and I know you've had an incredibly busy week. How's that been for you this week?
Oh, this has been, this has just been, I have a little bit of voice left. This has been an amazing week. I mean, this community has, the way it gets together around books is just extraordinary. I've really never seen anything like it. And the range of events and the number of people, the sheer number of people involved in pulling them all off is just, it says a lot for your community. It really does.
This is truly a book town. I have been super involved and then less involved with Whatcom Reads for about the 12 years that I've lived here. But the number of readers in this town is always astounding to me. It-
Yeah.
It's just wild. Just a whole bunch of book people in this town, which is really great.
Yeah.
So, so far, so you've done all of these events. Did you have your favorite or
Oh
one that
gosh.
surprised
Don't do
you?
that's like asking me my
I
favorite.
know.
You know what I loved? Okay, this is going to sound like I'm punting, but it's actually the truth. Um, what I loved was that each one was so different.
Yes.
So the first dinner at Evolve was this amazing culinary response to the book with a group of dedicated book lovers in a bookstore. I mean, okay, come on.
Amazing.
It's
Yeah.
like perfect. And then Lummi Island was the Grange Hall is this beautiful little wood paneled, you could just feel that space holding. We probably had 80 people there. And it just, I don't know, the space itself was bringing out the most interesting questions and discussions, and I loved that. Um, and then the Allied Arts to see the various artworks. Sip and Savor out at Bellwood Farms with each little cocktail that matched a book that had influenced me, and the conversation that we got to have about other people's books, which was really refreshing for me by that point.
Oh,
Uh,
I'm sure. Yeah.
and
And
then the craft class yesterday with all of these writers who were just exploring their writing and learning things. And then last night was an event like I have never ever participated in. The musical responses. Um, Rumor has it if you didn't get to go or see it, it will be available on the Whatcom County Reads site next week, hopefully. The music,
it
it
was
had
really
us in
good.
tears. I have never felt like my work was more seen
Oh,
than I felt with those songs. So that
yeah.
was that was a gift. It was a real gift.
Well, that's really lovely. And I always forget how beautiful the Mount Baker Theater is. And
Yeah.
every time I'm there, or every time I see it, it's a shock. So it's always a lovely shock because it's just so
Yeah.
beautiful. And
Well, and the people behind the scenes, I don't know if you all know how many people are behind the scenes making that a seamless event, but
so many.
wow, that was well done.
What I really love seeing is like seeing things that I've been seeing in the background at work, like the flowers or the centerpieces. I was like, oh, yep, Miranda did that. Oh, yeah, yep. I see Jenny in that, and it's a labor of love. You
Mhm.
know, it's a very intense week, but I think it's a labor of love. So I'm so glad that you're enjoying it. That's wonderful. And I'm glad that you were willing to do one more thing after all of that, which is today. I figured I'd ask some questions about the book, and then we talk a little bit about writing, and then of course, anybody who has questions, we'll ask those. First off, I just want to tell you that I've never had a book that has made me cry within the first 30 minutes. So thank you, I think. I had the pleasure of listening to it on audiobook, which again, you talked about the audiobook last night, but it's an amazing audiobook.
Mhm.
Just absolutely amazing. And I found myself crying on the way to work after I'd picked up a coffee. So A plus, I think that's the hallmark of a great book. So can you just talk a little bit about how you came to this book and the structure? Because you talked about this last night, and that was one of my favorite things you discussed last night was
Oh,
the
okay.
structure of the
Yeah.
book.
The idea came, I was in the middle of writing another book. We call it Erica's Dark and Snarky book. I'm still working on that book, but it was January of 2020. And I don't, do you remember January 2020?
Yeah,
We were
I
all
do.
pretty
Yeah.
exhausted. We didn't even know what was coming and we were already exhausted.
It's a
And it just
busy,
felt
rough
like
time.
we were all going into these silos, right? These little silos of opinion, and we weren't talking to each other. And book clubs were like the only place I went to where people were actually discussing differences of opinion in a way that felt positive and good.
Yeah.
And so I'm sitting there kind of frustrated with the book I'm working on and not knowing what to do. And my friend Holly always used to say, when I was stuck, which happens to us writers all the
Yeah,
time.
for sure.
And she would always say, Erica, is there anything you could be working on right now that would make you happy? And and so I was sitting at the kitchen table and this idea just fell into my head. Full structure, one book, nine readers. Why nine? Somebody asked me that. I have no idea. It was just, I knew it was nine. And we ended up adding Alice, the author, so that makes it 10. But what I wanted was, and I instinctively knew it would be interconnected stories because I wanted it to be about reading, not about the relationship between the readers, but about reading. And so interconnected short stories really allowed me to have each chapter be an individual thing, because these are strangers reading these books in isolation, but they are connected as a community of readers. So I wanted there to be connections between each of the characters and some arcs that went all the way through the whole book, Theo, the book at the center, being one of them. So that you would get that quasi novel experience while still having the structure reinforce that concept of strangers in community.
Yeah. I think what I really loved about it is I'm somebody who does read for character. I also read for plot, but character is usually like the main thing that I'm looking for. And I'm not a short story reader. So for this book to be as gripping as it is, I loved that the structure allowed it to feel like one novel, but it kind of felt like you were dropping into a life of somebody very, very deeply and then splashing out and then dropping right back in.
Right,
So it
right.
really,
Yeah,
I
no,
think,
I like to compare it to an advent calendar. When I was a kid, we had the ones with the little pictures, right? And you would
yeah,
open the picture and it would feel like you were getting this completely intimate view of something. You couldn't go inside, but you got to look at it. And I think that's what that structure allows you to feel like you're really dipping in. It's not for a long time, but you're in that person's life at a very important moment, and then you're back out again.
right. It felt like, at least for some of the characters, well, maybe all of the characters, like there's a hard point, like maybe the crisis has already passed or the crisis is coming, and they're coming to grips with something within that. And I like how the book being the connector is the thing that they're meditating their crisis on. When we read a book, we're not always in crisis, but I think it's a good way to open up a book and kind of reflect it back on your own experience, which is another point that you made last night that I really enjoyed was that when you're reading a book and you're having a reaction to come back and examine how how and why you're having that reaction. I think that's could you speak more to that, I guess?
Sure. Sure. I mean, we were talking about sort of the subjectivity of any of our reading. And of course, they always are, but I think we tend to expect everyone to have the same reaction, which is why book clubs or discussions or anything even like this is a good thing because you realize no, books are springboards for discussions. They're not these concrete things where you should know what I think.
Right.
No,
Yes.
a book is yours. The second it leaves me, it becomes yours. And you create the story that you are able to create based on the filters of your life experience.
Right.
And so I think that that ability to then take that step back and say, huh, why did I react so strongly to Tyler? Or what is it about William that is making me feel like something is being healed inside me? That one's often pretty obvious. But
Yeah.
some of the other ones, it's like, why does Miranda make me feel justified or prickly?
Right.
All
Yeah.
those sorts of things, because then you can look at it and go, oh, I'm having a relationship with a book, because that's what you're doing. And you learn a lot about yourself as well as the book when you do it.
Yeah. Do you have a character in this book that you feel particularly connected to, or do you feel connected to all of them?
I made it when the characters started showing up when I was 43 out of nowhere. I have no idea why. I like to say I blame premenopause or I don't know,
Yeah.
hormone shifting, but all of a sudden I was able to, I had imaginary people in my head. So maybe schizophrenia, I don't know, but, um, But it was so miraculous. It was what I had always wanted all my life was to be able
Yeah.
to write fiction and write characters that weren't based on people I knew. And so I made a deal with the universe and I said, okay, you keep sending them to me and I promise I will never take a character and like put him up against a wall and shoot at him. I really hate it when authors do that, right? If I
Yeah.
can't feel compassion or empathy for a character, I won't write them. And that
Yeah.
doesn't mean I have to like them, but I have to make a full court effort at understanding who they are so that they can become three-dimensional on the page. So that said, I loved every one of them. That said, I always say I would fight a bear for Nola or William, either one. But I think it's because
Yeah.
they need me. They still need me, you know? So,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting how you bring to that because I always for me the character was Kit, and I think
mm,
because there's a lot of analogs in Kit's life to my
mhm.
life.
It's,
He
it's,
might work in a bookstore, but I do spend a whole lot of time
mm,
recommending books to people. It's,
mhm.
part of my job. So I but every single one of those characters I found to be uh it actually eminently likable, which is not always a requirement for me, but it's always a pleasant bonus. So to have them to be such disparate characters, is wonderful. Like you feel for them, they're unique, they feel real, but you also like them.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Which is
I
why, we were talking last night about the difference with the structure and how one of the options was to put them all in the same book club.
yeah,
And you realize that if I had done something like that, you couldn't have had that multiplicity. You couldn't have had that diversity. It couldn't have gone over 10 years for that matter, which the book does.
right.
Um, but you could never put Tyler and Miranda and William and Madeline in the same book club. You would have had to have people who were much more homogeneous. And that to me would have taken a lot of fun out of it. So,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think another thing that I noticed and appreciated in No Two Persons was kind of the complex breadth and depth of femininity in the
mm.
book. There are a whole bunch of different type of women, you know. Was that deliberate or just, something that arose naturally?
um, I mean, that's a good question. Nobody's ever asked that question. I think I was looking for diversity, so I think you're going to get a range. I think there's also a range in the male characters as
Oh, for
well.
sure. Absolutely.
Between Rowan and Tyler and William and Kit, those are remarkably different ways to approach masculinity. But I also think that, yeah, I mean, the women really cover a wide age range as well and variety of experience, and yet there is a certain feminist undertone running through the whole thing, I would say.
I'm okay with that. I think most people
Yeah.
would be, but yeah. Well, it was nice to see. The other thing that is really good about this book is somebody who does recommend, and for clarity's sake, I also select adult fiction for the Bellingham Public Library, so I'm also buying a lot of fiction. Is just how easy this book is to recommend and how much every person on staff who's read it seems to really enjoy it. So I think it kind of speaks to its universality. Also, book people love books about books. So just like film people like films about films. So that's great. Let's see. What did I want to ask next? Ooh, I have a list.
Well, can I just jump in with something we were
Yeah,
talking about last night in
absolutely.
the question and answer, which if people didn't get a chance, I thought it was a really interesting part of the discussion, which is
Oh, it was great.
that sort of idea between nonfiction and fiction and what each genre brings. And sort of this idea that nonfiction is incredibly important. I research a remarkable amount to write my books. And I love nonfiction. I love reading science. I love reading history. Dive deep. I probably have 50 books on the sense of smell.
Wow.
So I go into it. Um, the difference is, I think, and this is my response to the people who don't read fiction, is that nonfiction is about the how and the what. And fiction is what teaches us to imagine the why. And I think that is so incredibly important. So that's what I was doing with each of these characters was why would someone want to free dive? And let's imagine what it's like to be in that person's head. And it isn't just about free diving, it's about being scared. It's about being at the mercy of someone else's power. And that is something you can translate out into the bigger world. And it doesn't matter that Tyler as it was never a blood and bones human being. I think lots of times we can do an exploration into the human condition in ways in fiction that we could not do if we were constrained by the limits of what's already happened in the real world. And so, for the Kit has that discussion with his girlfriend Annalise about how, and I love that she's the scientist and he's
Yeah,
the fiction reader, where she just says, yeah, but they're not real. And it is this complete understanding of how differently they think.
yeah.
And I think that right now, particularly at this point in time in our country, we need to be able to have the emotional intelligence to imagine the whys way more often. So,
Yeah. Um, I, as a fiction selector, every once in a while, I'll have somebody come up and be like, "Well, you get to do the fun stuff." And I was just like, "Well, if you've ever read fi fiction, there is fiction that is not fun to read,
mhm.
but there is fiction that has taught me quite a bit about myself and about the world. And I think it's just basically a matter of empathy. I think in a lot of ways, reading teaches us to exist in other people's bodies, with other people's minds.
Yeah.
And
Well, and I think I always think it's interesting because people will say, "Oh, your book was so easy to read," or "It's so nice." And I think there are people dying, there are people getting divorced, there's a kid that's getting who commits suicide, people are getting beaten up. And then I realized that really what it is for me is that I lean toward hope. I
yeah,
lean toward possibility. It isn't that I have some nice saccharine ending.
no,
But I think it takes as much intellectual capacity and courage to consider how we can be kind to each other, those often serendipitous moments when we're kind to each other. I
yeah.
think that is as strong of an intellectual pursuit as it is to figure out how we are cruel to each other. It's just that one in our society tends to be seen as serious and the other isn't. And I think that's a shame.
Well, especially as you mentioned, all the research that you do for your books. And
Mhm.
I know a lot of my favorite fiction authors do a whole bunch of research before anything is even committed to the page. So I'm
Mhm.
always just like, it's
Yeah.
I do have a fun job. I'm never upset about it, but the act of writing fiction, I think, in a lot of ways is as revolutionary as writing fact.
Yeah.
And I
Oh, my
like
poor
the
family. Every time I go down a rabbit hole, they're like, okay, so more about smell? Okay, here we go. So,
Speaking of smell, actually, that's how I got introduced to you was through The Scent Keeper. It
hmm.
was actually a book we considered for Whatcom Reads, oh, probably 5 or 6 years ago. And that's actually the first book of yours that I read. So, it was exciting for me to see a book that, they're fundamentally different types of books.
Yeah.
But I loved both of them, both the same. So you basically, in my head, you're just Wacom Reads. Like you're just going to be associated with Wacom Reads forever. So congratulations. It's a good thing to be associated with. I know that some authors who write for character have a trouble with endings, kind of like I guess the best example would be Stephen King. Do you have trouble with endings? Because I will say that No Two Persons has a very satisfying ending, at least personally, I believe.
Well, and it has a satisfying ending because we had a problem with Scent Keeper. So I
Okay.
learned. And in fact, the section of Madeline's story where they're talking about endings and some people needing a strong ending and some people not, that was my little love letter to all those readers who were like, what? So the story is that when Scent Keeper first came out in hardback, it did not have an epilogue. And I had written an epilogue. We had thought about having an epilogue, and we decided, no, we're going to go for a more subtle ending, and we did not include it. The book came out, it was obvious it needed the epilogue. People would just got to the end and went, wait, what? It's not done. I need like, I need one more beat.
Right.
Because the difference between a traditional novel ending, where you have one character and it's all these pieces that have to all come together. I always say it's like Simone Biles landing a vault, right? You
Right.
just
Yeah.
gotta punch it, right? Well, interconnected stories are different, which is what I usually write.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And an interconnected story ending is much lighter. And what we're trying to do there is give you a realization that that also makes you go, oh, wait, now that reflects back. Now I need, and that's why so many people came up to me last night and said, I'm reading it for the second, the third, the fourth time, because it is supposed to open your way of thinking and not end the story, but almost I don't know, recast it in a way. And
Sure.
so when the paperback for Scent Keeper came out, I said, we need to put the epilogue in because we need that extra beat. And so there actually is a difference if you read Scent Keeper between the hardback and the
Oh.
paperback. Um,
I read the paperback, so
yeah.
yeah, that makes
Well, and
sense.
what was amazing was instantly the reviews changed. As I mean, I can tell you which version someone read based on how they're reviewing the book. So I learned a lot from that.
Okay.
And so when it came to No Two Persons, I knew I wanted an interconnected story ending, but it was also the epilogue. It was also the pulling it together. So whatever it was needed to be that kind of pen and ink sketch feeling, but it also needed to pull it together in a way. It also helped that I had promised my agent that each character would be connected to at least one other character. And at the time, Miranda was connected to no one. And I didn't know how she was going to connect. And my
Gotcha.
agent was saying, well, Rowan lives on an island, Miranda lives on an island. Maybe they could go to the same island and have an affair or something. And I'm like, no, we are not doing that. But I knew I had to do something with Miranda. And I also knew I needed my ending. I knew that Alice needed something to springboard her to the next point. And I just let those two things kind of simmer together, along with a lot of other things. And then in the middle of the night, as so often happens, it came together. 4 in the morning, I wake up. It's like, that's it. And I love that ending. It's one of my favorite endings I've ever written.
When I say satisfying, that's like my barometer of a book. Like I'll tell people this one has a satisfying ending. You're gonna love this book, and then you're gonna love the ending. And I would agree. It just was like all the pieces. It was like a puzzle, and it all came together towards the end, and it was lovely. Because as you can tell, I really loved Alice, and like I was worried about her. It was just like, oh, she got to get on this, like write this other book. And it was lovely. So,
Well, and Nola too. I mean, it was like
right,
when I
yeah,
was
oh, I
trying to figure
won't.
out who was going to be Madeline's helper, it's like I
Oh,
really,
absolutely.
I needed to know what happened to Nola. And if I needed to know that bad, I knew other people did. And the rest of the characters, I think most people are willing, they want to know, they want to make sure William got down the mountain. And I'm just here to tell you, he got down the mountain. If he
Right.
hadn't, that would have been the story I would have told you. But um, for most of the other ones, their arc was really quite complete. But Nola was young enough that there
Yeah.
was a lot of life left, and I liked that her story was, you were able to have that contrast of knowing that she was okay and letting Madeline go in the same story, and that I love it when there could be a contrast like that.
Yes, that's a really lovely way of putting it. Nola is a character that I both love and then also had a fairly visceral reaction to just because of our own homelessness crisis that we're going through and seeing these kids and these adults going through it and just knowing that she's okay
Yeah.
makes me very happy. So
Mhm.
thank you for
Mhm.
that. I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So, got about 10 more minutes, so I figured we'd talk about your writing process. Are you somebody who writes every day, or do you write as inspiration takes you?
It has varied over the years. When I
Okay.
started, I had little kids, so I wrote in any 10 minutes I had. Um, No Two Persons was an aberration in terms of my writing process because we had a pandemic. And
Yeah.
so, and I had built a writing studio down in our orchard, which is this little 8 by 8. It is not a she shed, it is a studio. Do not call them she
Okay.
sheds. Anyway, my husband calls it the isolation tank. And I go down there and I would do that every day for like 4 or 5 hours a day and just no internet, no social media, no nothing. And I would just write. And that was an extraordinary experience, which I doubt I will ever be able to recreate outside of a pandemic because life comes back, right? And now I'm able to go to events. I'm able to go visit my grandchildren. I mean, things happen. And
Right. Yeah.
but it was, and I think that's part of why No Two Persons has the feeling it does, both the isolation of the characters, but also that it just feels of a whole to me because 18 months, I've never written a book quite that fast.
Yeah.
So,
I
particularly one that involved that much research, but I was bored.
I mean, we all were.
Yeah, we all were.
Spent a lot of time on Zoom. I think that's interesting because you can, like, if you didn't know that it was written during COVID, you might not clock that it was a COVID written book, but knowing that it was, I can feel it, in the narrative. It's interesting some of the artwork that we've gotten out of it.
Yeah.
And honestly, some of our habits, I know that you do a lot of, you talk to book groups a lot over Zoom. So you're basically a professional at what we're doing right now. Um, uh, what is it about joining all of these book groups that I know does it for you, I guess would be the way I put that question.
Um, well, particularly with No Two Persons, I mean, I'm indebted to book clubs because that's where the idea came from. And so this is their book. And it's a very meta experience to be talking to a book club about how each of them is reading this book about how you read books differently. I mean, it's just you just kind of feel like you're that cream of wheats box where each one is, or Russian nesting dolls or something.
Yeah.
Um, but I love hearing the reactions. I love kind of facilitating that discussion toward the awareness of how what their differing reactions means in terms of the world outside.
Yeah.
Um, I love usually during a book club, we will discover, or I will help to discover, that those Venn diagrams at the beginning of each chapter actually are cheat sheets that show you who is connected to whom in,
Oh,
yes, yes.
okay. Oh, wow.
So I'll just give you a brief little thing. When you open the book, and sorry if you got an ebook, you can go on my website. So if you got
Yes.
audiobook or ebook, you can go on my website. We've got all the graphics up there. But when you go to part one, there's a single circle, and that is the story. You go to Alice's story, and a circle intersects the story, and that's Alice. And then each chapter adds a new character, and the circles that that circle intersects with are who that character is connected to. So you can kind of check your work. If you're one of those Easter egg hunters, and there are a
Oh,
lot
yeah.
of them out there now, you can see if you can find the connections.
Oh, yeah.
I'm
Okay.
here to tell you the ones in William's story are usually the most obscure for people and have fun.
Well, that makes me want to go back because as a science fiction fantasy reader, those Easter eggs are absolutely what you live and die by, right?
Mhm,
Everybody loves
mhm.
them. So in terms of your writing, you said that this book was the fastest that you've written. Do you tend to put things like away in a drawer before you get it out, or do you try to get it out to your publisher immediately?
It really varies. It
Okay.
really varies. House Lessons, I wrote four different versions over 15 years, and it was the 15-year version that worked, and it just kept getting put aside and put aside. I
Gotcha.
just had to grow up enough to write that book well, honestly.
Yeah.
Um, and so there are other books that have been put aside and come back. The nice thing about interconnected short stories, though, is that I don't necessarily write a whole story. I'm more that way, but especially when I first started writing, say, School of Essential Ingredients and Joy for
Yeah.
Beginners. Um, I would know several of the stories, which ones they were going to be. And then I wake up in the morning, it's like, oh, okay, I'm feeling kind of prickly. I should write, say, Miranda, right?
Sure.
Or I'm
Yeah.
feeling quieter. Maybe I should be doing William, and that allowed me to kind of go with the mood and ride that wave toward that story. Um, And then the problem is when you get down to one or two, you really have to like fish or cut bait. And so now I'm working on two different projects. They're very different from each other. One is quiet and contemplative, and the structure is very complicated. And the other one's I'm still working with dark and snarky.
Oh, that's
So,
amazing.
and those are very different moods. And so I've been switching back and forth between books, which I don't think in the end is a smart, it's not anything I would recommend.
Okay.
But given our fraught times, and how high your emotions can be, or how much you need quiet, or you want to be angry, they've both kind of been growing up together. But I think you make better progress if you're working interconnected short stories toward one product rather than two.
That's right. Oh, so when you're in between these two projects, do you do things to delineate between them? Do you like listen to different music, drink a
Yeah,
different
good
drink?
question. Good
Yeah.
question. I read different books.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what I like to do, I was talking about this in the writing class, is that you it's really a great idea to what I call priming the pump. So when you're writing in a certain voice, you surround yourself with that kind of voice. It's not like you're trying to plagiarize someone else's work, but so for Dark and Snarky, she's a first person, sharp, smart, so there's going to be a lot of looking for that kind of voice. I listen to a lot of audiobooks that have that kind of first person voice. Um, the other one being quieter and more contemplative, when I'm doing that one, I'm going to look for those lyrical, gorgeous sentences that really pull you into a place and are quieter and more character driven. So yeah, because I do think I think writers are naturally osmotic. That way we take in what's around us. That's why when my daughter was reading, I don't know if it was 50 Shades of Grey or Twilight or whatever, she was much younger. Her reading tastes have really changed. And she would want me to read the book so that I would know what was going on in her life. And I tried and I just said, I can't. These sentence structures are so simple that I will write like that, and I cannot afford to do that right now. So I will read it at some point, and I did. Like as soon as I finished that book, I did it. But I have to be. It's like I have to be careful about what I'm around, or it's going to slow me down.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. I kind of yeah, that's kind of blowing my mind a little bit. That I like that a lot.
Well, but books have, I mean, the style that the author uses is like music.
Right.
I was telling people I write out loud, I read out loud. I mean, I edit out loud because I want to hear the rhythms of the sentences. I want to hear the sounds of the words. And I care very much about those things. And I'm fairly tone deaf, which is why it was so amazing how much I loved the music last night. But I can't create music myself. But so that is my way to indulge that need for
Right.
rhythm and sound and texture, kind of oral texture.
That's wonderful. So we're getting close to question and answer now, but is there a question that I haven't asked or nobody's asked this week that you feel like you should answer?
Gosh, well, I mean, it might be sitting there in the Q&A. Maybe we should let them do theirs first, and
All
then at
right,
the
first,
end,
yeah,
I
you're
can do
that is
that.
a good point. Have you ever, well, and on that note, have you ever had a question surprise you a little bit?
About no two persons, or
Or just in general? Yeah.
Um, actually, one of the most amazing experiences was when I was doing Joy for Beginners. And in Joy for Beginners, the basic premise is it's a cancer support group. The woman at the center of it, it's a group surrounding a woman with cancer, and
Yeah.
she ends up going into remission. So it's a more hopeful book that way. But she has to learn how to get back into her body and trust this body that is, to a certain extent, betrayed her. And
Okay.
so her friends want her to go rafting down the Grand Canyon. And she says, okay, I will do that, but you each have to do one thing in the next year that is new or difficult or scary. And I get to choose what it is. And that's the trick. Because when we choose things for ourselves, we don't tend to choose the really tough ones. And the whole book was about how our greatest fears are often very small and so entwined within us that we don't even notice them. So, okay, so that's the premise of the book. I am at a big Barnes and Noble. Garth Stein is interviewing me, and Garth is a good friend, right? He would never want to like send this train off the rails. But he turns to me and he said, "What would Kate have?" Kate was the character who was
Yeah.
assigning. He said, "What would Kate have you do?" And I was used to people saying, "What would you do?" And I'd say, "Oh, skydiving," or, Kate, who knows your inner secrets. She knows all these secrets because people tell someone they think is dying things they wouldn't tell anyone else. And I'm sitting up on this stage in front of all of these people, and I just about start crying. And he's kind of looking at me like, "Oh, I didn't know. What did I do to you? What did I do to you?" And I just said, voice lessons. She'd have me take voice lessons because I can't because I'm fairly tone deaf. I can't sing. And all my life people have said, please don't, you know, and it's a terrible thing to be told not to sing. And so, I mean, I'm obviously having the same reaction now, but it was such a moment to just have something from my own, and I should have seen it coming, right?
Yeah,
But no,
theoretically, yeah.
theoretically, yeah, but no, no.
As a fellow tone deaf person, I understand this fear deeply and have also been told not to sing. So I
I think we
appreciate
should
that.
just sing anyway.
I
Just
think so
let deal
too.
with it.
That's pretty much where I've landed on it over the years, but it took me a while to get there.
Mhm.
Um, so let's dive in. It looks like we've got 5 questions. And I don't know if you've looked at the chat, but somebody said that they really loved the book about renovating your house.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So, I'm gonna start with one that just got direct messaged to me. There's a strong thread of neighborhood in no two persons. I wonder how your experience as a mother impacted the book. How did your kids respond to the book?
Did you say neighborhood or motherhood? Strong thread.
Motherhood, I think. It said neighborhood, but I think they mean
I think they mean
motherhood.
motherhood. Okay.
Motherhood,
All
yeah.
right. Because I'm thinking with the neighborhood part.
Yeah.
Motherhood, yes. Uh, I mean, I have been a mother. I have watched a lot of mothers. I think it is one of the most formative and transformative and soul-filling and lonely, and I've written about it numerous times. Um, and it I think it's something we don't talk about enough. There is this very stereotypical, Vaseline filtered view sometimes. And I think that causes us to see both the extent of the highs and the extent of the lows. And so I like to explore those. My children are both parents themselves now. And so I think they are now reading those scenes differently than, say, when I wrote School of Essential Ingredients and there was a young mother, and that was 2009, and they were half the age they are now. So, and that's an interesting thing to watch your kids re-see your work as they grow older.
Yeah. Wonderful. Let's see. Leslie Williams says, "Do you have a physical copy of the book Theo, or is it just in pieces in your mind?"
So the backstory about Theo, everybody wants to know where it came from. And it actually came from Scentkeeper. When I wrote Scentkeeper, I originally wrote it from 3 points of view. Emmeline, the main character, her love interest, Fisher, and then her father, John. And it became apparent over time that that structure did not work for that book. It needed to be a single character, kind of identity quest type of story. But in the meantime, I had written Fisher's entire backstory, most of which I had to cut because his father can't drown because Emmeline's father ended up drowning, and you can't have all the fathers drown in the same book. That's just
No,
too
you
freaking
can't.
weird. But that that whole part where Fisher learned how to cold water swim and all the research I did into that. And then that whole scene where he takes his father out in the boat and gets him drunk and dives over the edge. And then this realization he has when his father calls his name in utter agony because he thinks his son has died, and Fisher believes that his father hates him. And he all of a sudden realizes that he can't, and then his father dies. And that honestly was some of the best writing I've ever done in my life. And I had to cut it. I had no choice. And so and I think that's part that residual feeling of not being quite complete is probably part of what drove Alice's story. And
Gotcha.
what then my subconscious is going, and yes, guess what? You've got Fisher. So that was my way of giving Fisher his due, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So there's no there's probably 40,000 words of Fisher, but it's not the whole arc of Theo.
Fair enough. Yeah. So an anonymous attendee says, I attended the art and craft of writing at Village Books and appreciate your encouragement for people who love to write to claim that they are writers. A writer sees the world in stories, you said. That is a special thing you own. Thank you for that. You said it was one of the things you really wanted to hear us to hear this week. My question, during your time in Whatcom County, did you see something that conjured a story for you?
Mm. I mean, that whole concept of writers as magpies, collecting everything. Um, there were so many little things. And I think this is why, writers are often tired at the end of an event because, I probably talked to 50 people in the line last night, and there were so many stories there that are just now sitting in the back of my head. Not stories about that person, but a moment, a way one person looked at another person, the way they handed somebody a pen, the way a book club's going to put their arms around each other. I mean, all of those things sort of become fodder, I suppose, in a way. And I don't know how they'll reconnect. So it isn't ever that I see a situation and say, "Oh, I'm going to write about that." I see the pieces, and then they all come together.
I That's lovely. Yeah, it's something you observe, then gets absorbed and becomes something else.
Hmm.
Yeah. So another anonymous attendee says, your use of simile and metaphor in no two persons is so apt and marvelous. Do you have a notebook in which you gather possible metaphors, or do they come to you as you write?
So there's a long story with this. We were joking last night about the Kirkus interview review of my first book, School of Essential Ingredients, where the reviewer referred to the pitiless blitzkrieg of metaphors. So I have made this very determined effort to keep imagery and poetry in my work without always using metaphors and similes. And so by the time I get to know two persons, I want them to be, if I'm going to use that grammatical form, it is going to be the best idea I can come up with. So I do not collect them. What I tend to do is come up with a thing that I want my reader to have an image and an emotional attachment to the concept. And that means slowing the work down and giving them another image that they might understand a little better to attach to this image. And so that just means that when I'm thinking about that object or that moment or that characteristic, what I do is I just sit with it for a minute, and then I kind of give my mind free rein. It's like, what could it be? Um, and and the more unusual, usually the better, honestly. Um, and then I also, what I've been trying to do consistently since School of Essential Ingredients is to add to my writer's toolkit in terms of what are the other ways. So in No Two Persons, I really worked on verbs. Like, how do you make a verb be a metaphor? So if a story fireworks off a page, I don't have to say the story was like a firework. I can turn it into a verb. And so, or I can use the sound of a word. Rowan talks about the word agonized sounding. It literally sounds like someone drowning. And so that idea of let's find the word that sounds like it, that gives you, that's unusual, gives you an image, gives you a feeling. Let's use that so that I'm not always just, dependent upon this is like this.
Gotcha. Okay. Oh, that's lovely. I that in Rowan's story, I did actually, that was probably my favorite part is him making those noises because there are just some words that are emotionally evocative just because of the way they sound.
Yes. Yes.
So Patricia Krause asks, what would you tell this writer to never do in my passion for writing?
Let anybody tell you how to do it, as if there is only one way. We talked about this a lot in the craft class yesterday, that there's so many people, there's so many craft books out there, and a lot of them are very open-ended, but some of them are ridiculously didactic. And if it doesn't work for you to put your butt in the chair and knock it up for 2,000 words, it doesn't work for me, by the way. It's terrible. Um, it probably cost me 2 years on School of Essential, I mean, on ScentKeeper because I tried doing that and it was
Right.
totally wrong for me. So I think that the one of the fun parts about or satisfying educational parts of being a writer is figuring out what works for you. So if you write in the morning, great. If you write at night, great. It isn't, you can write sober, you can write drunk. I don't care. But if it works for you, that's that's what writing means. And I read a lot of craft books. I get a lot of tips, but I always work it against my own internal barometer of is this helping me?
Yeah.
You get to be ridiculously selfish about that.
Hey, I think that's wonderful. That's exactly how I tell people to read as well,
Hmm.
because nobody can tell you what
Yes.
is a good book.
Yes.
Sometimes we do get parents being like, I want my kids to read the best books, and you're just like, I think really honestly, the best book is the one that they want to read, rather
Yes. And
than,
figuring out why they like it. I mean,
yeah,
come on. Yeah.
yeah, it's a
That's a
personal.
good librarian, by the way. Good on
Well,
you.
thanks. Yeah, I try not to get super annoyed at that question and just, start using your, yeah.
Mhm.
Enough said about that. I've got a bunch more just have popped up. So Barbara Zalestra says you're talking about motherhood, and I really liked Nola's few sentence about a mother being human. Too often, we mothers have a perfect standard to live up to. I'm also drawn to all the water and deep diving metaphor that flows throughout the book. So more of a statement rather than a question, but
But I
figured.
do think, I mean, and that was one of the through lines of Scentkeeper too, is that ability to grow up enough to see our parents as human beings as
Yeah.
opposed to a role. Like, I mean, I honestly think a lot of us think our parents were born the same day we were, because that's when history started, right? And
Yeah.
to realize that this person has an entire life before you ever entered, and there are reasons that they are acting the way they are. It's one of the reasons why I write, is to try to understand my parents.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
and I just think that the more we can make that cognitive shift, the more healthy we are. And I wanted to show that in Nola's story was that she was making that shift.
I actually think it wasn't Miranda, but oh, the character on the island. My apologies. It's been a long morning.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, Miranda's on the island.
okay,
Yeah.
yes, Miranda. Her that back and forth with her mother, it felt a lot like a back and forth that I had. My mother and I have a very great relationship, but it's always like you say, a kind of a shock when you realize as an adult your parent is a human. And I think that story in particular worked on both ends, like as a mother, but also as a daughter. So you did a great
Yeah.
job.
Yeah, it's kind of I love how people react to that book because mothers are like, "Oh yeah." And daughters are like, "Uh-huh." And y'all are
Mhm.
reading completely different stories here.
Yeah.
But I liked that Nola and Miranda played off each other, that both characters were learning a similar lesson, but in such different ways from the same book or from
Right.
an encounter with the same book.
Book. Yeah, 100%. Let's see. I've got two more questions. We got 6 more minutes. I think we can
We can
do
do
that.
it.
Um, can you discuss how you came to the title of the book? Were you familiar with the quote by Edmund Wilson prior to writing the novel?
Yes, absolutely. And it's part of what inspired it. Two things there. One, it didn't start out with that title. It started out with the title, The Book of Theo. And people rightly told me that might sound religious, which I hadn't even thought of. So this is why we have focus groups.
Right.
Um, then it was going to be Kaleidoscope. And then someone came out with that title right as we were considering titles. So that didn't work. And then I realized that because my publisher wanted to put a novel on the cover of the book rather than a novel and stories, I was going to need to give my readers some heads up of what was coming. And so
Right.
you've got the tagline on the back of one book, nine readers, 10 changed lives. That kind of gives you that subliminal idea, at least, that this is going to be a multi-person book. And then no two persons, and then the ability to read the quote immediately as you come into the book kind of frames the experience. But I
Mhm.
want to note it's not Edmund Wilson. It's not.
Oh,
I know everything on the internet tells you it is, but he didn't say it. He said a very similar but different quote about you can't step in the same river twice, which is
right.
you can't read the same book twice. But that no two persons ever read the same book is actually from a woman named Madame Sweatshine. She was a Russian noblewoman. She has it there is it is quoted in a book that she wrote 26 years, I think, before Edmund Wilson was born. So once again, the
Uh,
internet. Don't trust the internet.
don't trust the internet. Contact your local library. We will
Mhm.
always run down quotes. We do it a lot, actually. People do
I
ask.
miss calling the personal librarian. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can still call us. I answered some reference questions this morning, so. So the last question, which I think is a really fun one, is what did you love to read as a young person?
Mm. I was gifted with a well-read mother who gave us, I mean, our children's books were so formative in terms of who I became. I mean, it's the house in the little house in the country, the one where the house, the city comes in and the house falls apart and then they take care of the house and move it out to the country again. Why do you think I renovated a house? The country bunny and the little golden shoes. I mean, why do you think I'm a feminist mother?
Right,
Just,
yeah.
those kinds of things. Little House on the Prairie, I loved her independence. I mean,
Yeah.
that was just and again, my mom was, she wore stockings and heels while she vacuumed the house, but boy, she gave us some really great role models as we were growing up. So I appreciated those books, and even if I didn't always feel that independent or that self-sufficient myself, I loved knowing that I could be if I wanted to be.
Yeah. I always, we always kind of think that every generation is discovering something that nobody has ever discovered before. But, if you go back to two of my touchstones, which would be Anne of Green Gables and Little Women, I mean, both of those writers were extremely radical and progressive for their times,
Yeah.
and their characters leap off the page and, are very good role models. I would still recommend those books to people today.
I'm making a pilgrimage to Prince Edward Island this summer.
I really
Because
want to.
yeah,
Yeah.
if Canada lets me in. We'll just,
If they'll let us. I mean,
Mhm.
hopefully they'll still let us. I do want to do it as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, Claire's here.
Wow, what a great conversation and what great questions from the audience. Thank you so much, everybody who has been along for the ride on this lovely rainy Saturday morning. Um, Gosh, Erica, it's been a great 4 days. So thank you so much for coming to Whatcom County and sharing yourself with us. This is going down in the books as one of the greats. Um,
Been such a
so,
pleasure, such a gift.
well, I am putting in the chat right now a link to our feedback and evaluation form. The team at Whatcom Reads loves to know what we're doing well and what we can improve upon. So I encourage everybody who's in the audience today to please click on that link and answer a few short questions. We're getting great feedback in the chat right now, by the way. I love listening to this wonderful chat. Thank you to all three of you so much for your time and sharing with the rest of us. Thank you for that, Christy. Um, Wonderful things coming through there. Um, and then, Katie, well done.
Oh,
Thank
thanks.
you. Thank you for managing your cat.
I'm so
It
sorry
seemed
about.
like it was a it was a bit of a
I'm
I
so
think you
sorry.
I think you did a really good
Free
job of
cat.
like seeming like you were being very still, but I have a feeling that below, I think your hands were very busy
Keep him off
trying
the.
to restrain the kitty. So, and thank you for your thoughtful questions. So what we like to do is announce the next year's selection, right? So here we go, everybody. Whatcom Reads 2026 is Solito, a memoir by Javier Zamora. The Whatcom Writes prompt is family, formed, found, and chosen. That will actually also be the prompt for the art challenge as well, sponsored by Allied Arts. We are very much looking forward to this. It's so excited for this title. So again, thank you all. I'm grateful to Katie and to Erica, and thank you to our audience. This has been wonderful. Go forth and read, and we'll see you soon.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.